Hi parents, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes and talk to you about how we're going to be approaching fractions. A lot of us learned some little tricks when we were learning about fractions. For instance, if you're comparing fractions, how to determine which one's larger. Maybe you knew the rule or learned the rule that if there's a larger denominator, that means a smaller fraction, a smaller piece, but it's a bigger number, but it indicates a smaller piece. You might have learned the little crisscross trick. What we're going to do is try to avoid tricks, especially in the beginning. Now, and once we learn about the concept of fractions, that has maybe a place. But what I see with students when they learn something like, for instance, if there's a bigger denominator, that means it's a smaller, they say smaller fraction. It doesn't really mean that. It means it's a smaller part. But the way they interpret it is it's a smaller fraction. So they might look at this comparison and then first of all, a lot of times they'll just look at the denominator and say, oh, that's a bigger fraction because they see a 9 and it's a bigger number. But again, we do a lot of instruction about what that denominator is really saying and what it really is. But first thing I see students do, oh, that's a bigger one. And then if they remember that, rule or that trick that, oh, if it's a bigger number on the bottom, that means it's actually a smaller fraction. Then they'll go, oh, that's smaller. And again, they're not taking in the whole fraction. That may or may not be true. So when we learn little tricks like that, they don't have enough information to find their way when they get lost. If it's not quite working out, they're not sure why it meant what it meant. So it's hard to find out how to backtrack and reason through it. What we're trying to teach our students is to really reason through the amount that these fractions are representing. Just like when they were little and they had to understand what that really is just a squiggle, right? What that symbol meant. First, they found out it was called 3, right? And then they had to understand what 3 meant so that when they said $3 or a 3-year-old or 3 hours, they had a conceptual understanding of how much that was, the amount that was represented by that. We're doing the same thing for fractions. So we want to take time to learn how to read it, right? It's 1/3. And then we want to hone in and look and focus in on the denominator. What is that telling me? Understanding that it's a label. It's telling me something about the whole. It's telling me that the whole is divided into 3 parts. Whatever the whole could be a pizza, but it also could be a whole day or a whole hour or a whole song, a whole anything. But whatever the whole was, it was divided into 3 parts. And this represents that you have one of the 3 parts. So the first step, read it. Second step, interpret the denominator. What's that telling me? Third step, how many of those items do I have? I have 1 of the thirds. And next is to reason about what amount that is representing, 1/3. And you can kind of think, is that a little bit of the whole, half of the whole, almost the whole thing? Even that simple series of thoughts will help your child reason about the amount that they're looking at. And that's going to be hugely important as they begin to really interpret these. So reading it, checking out the denominator, thinking how many of those parts you have, and then reasoning about the size. Sometimes it'll even be more than a whole, but take those few moments to reason through and you will see that they will have a better time as they go forward learning about fractional amounts.